And we are live. So this is the regular meeting of Rundfunk mitbestimmen at Agile Ventures. And it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 people now. I can see Faith, Federico, Mariam, and Matt, and myself. So I just got home, so I couldn't really have a look into the recent pull request. I think that you, Faith, you committed on branch database config template.
Yes.
Is that true? And since last week, I don't know if everybody has noticed it, but the last regular, at the end of last week's meeting, Matt and I think it was also Faith, you were still with us. We tried to fix an awkward bug in branch gender demography. And my presumption was actually correct. There was a bug in a third-party library. So I fixed that the day after, and it was merged by the maintainer of this third-party library. And yeah. So
what was the library, Robert? What was the name of the library?
The name of the library is Ember Data Factory Guy. I can show you the relevant code. So this is the repository. I will share the link.
Okay.
And the relevant pull request is here. No. This is the relevant pull request. And yeah. So as I recall from last time, we were on, we had the problem, we wanted to build a front-end test, and this front-end test had some kind of race condition. So we are checking whether the date that we choose from dropdown, that will save a date to the backend database. And in the test, we are kind of creating that date from scratch. Then we execute the test and click on that dropdown, and we try to compare, or we are expecting those dates to be the same. The date that we're expecting, that we created in the test, and the date that we are receiving from front end. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yes.
And I was thinking that this test was yet failing because of a race condition, because those two dates might be like 3 seconds or 2 seconds different. Right?
Uh-huh.
So we need to have some kind of fuzzy matching, like comparing two dates, and don't care about 10 seconds or like 60 seconds, as long as it's roughly the same.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And Matt, you like, first of all, so that was last week. I would probably suggest that we pull in the updated plugin into this branch and check if that fixes the test. But let's maybe ask everybody, are there any questions so far since last week? I think, for example, Faith, you asked me why Ember in the Slack.
Yeah.
And I tried to answer like the question why Ember and why SPA, like why a single page application. Does it make sense to you to use an SPA after all?
The explanation you gave makes sense, but I hadn't really thought about whether it makes sense or not to use a single page application.
Right.
Yeah.
So I have to agree that if you do just server-side rendering, the complexity is way smaller. So from my current experience as a backend developer, I can say that just having one server-side application is much easier to maintain than having two pieces of software that need to work together.
Okay. All right. And then, yeah, like point number 2 is something I was hoping you'd mention.
Say it again.
The second point you mentioned about using data, like the explanation you gave, number 2, like
Yeah,
it's something
so
I
I
was
remember.
hoping you're going to mention. Yeah. So yeah.
Yeah,
I'm
so
just mentioning it.
there are several SPA frameworks for building single-page applications, and Ember is just one out of those. And you can choose any of those. React is a very popular SPA framework. Another very popular one is Vue.js. And Ember is just yet another popular framework. The difference between all of those is like it's another framework, and I like Ember because Ember comes with a lot of things included, which is not the case compared to React, for example, where you have all different plugins and you build everything yourself. So having Ember is good for prototyping things because you start from scratch, for example, and React might be better suited for legacy applications where you need to step by step convert an existing application into this front end application. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does.
Are there questions from any of you? For example, Mariam, do you have any questions since last week? Did you try out the setup, or did you had a look into the issue list or something?
Yes, I installed the locally installed Ember and everything else needed for the project, and I tried to look through the good first issues, but I still hadn't decided on what to work on. So yeah.
Yeah.
I will try to start on an issue maybe on the weekend.
Yeah. Are you using, what kind of operating system are you using?
I'm using Windows, but I'm trying to run it on Vagrant.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
You will be happy. I don't know how the state of Docker is on Windows, but I'm also working on a branch to make it easier to have this local setup. So I know that, for example, people who are using Mac OS have troubles to set up the database, and we can solve this problem, I hope, with Docker. And I don't know, does anybody of you know how Docker, what's the state of Docker on Windows? So I know it works on Linux and Mac. Does anybody know, or does anybody use Windows and Docker and has some kind of experience with it so far?
I used it and it was working fine. Yeah.
So you're using it on Windows and it's working fine?
Yes.
Without Vagrant and anything?
Yeah, but I did get some problems with the lines, the end of lines. Because if I copy a directory using Windows, it doesn't recognize the line ending for Windows. So
I didn't get the last thing. Could you repeat that one, please?
I said that the problem that I got was that the line ending for Windows when you have files on Windows, that was a problem. So that's why I used Vagrant.
I see. I see. Maybe, I mean, a couple of weeks ago, I tried to do some kind of tutorial on Docker, or having an overview of Docker. Is that something that would be interesting for everybody, or are there any questions? So I'm still deciding what could we talk about in this regular meeting.
So I think Miriam would be interested in the Docker stuff because we have a NHS project where she's been working with Docker.
Can you come a little bit closer to your microphone and maybe turn the volume a little bit more? Oh.
Yeah, sorry. I was saying that I think Miriam would be interested in Docker related talk.
Yes.
Yeah, because she's been working on one of our paid projects, which is with NHS, the National Health Service in the UK.
Yeah, nice.
And they're setting up. They're using Docker for that project. They're trying to set up Docker for that, and I think they got it working, right?
Okay.
Yes. It's working now.
Yeah.
Okay,
and I think
so
that was
Docker is a very complex thing to talk about. I will just give, so all I can do is maybe switch to the branch that I was working on and explain the Docker setup for our current installation. And maybe that will help. And I will try to cover Docker and Docker Compose. And honestly, I'm a beginner with Docker myself, so I might confuse those two tools, but I'll try my best. Does that sound like a good idea?
Yes.
Yeah.
Who has heard about Docker apart from Federico and Mariam so far? Faith and Matt, have you heard about Docker so far?
Yes, I have.
You have?
Yes.
Cool. And I think with Matt, I was discussing the Docker setup with him too. So maybe I can maybe I can talk about that and just share my screen. So I'm going to share my screen, my entire screen. Inception. Okay. So there is a branch called Docker update. A friend of mine was doing a Docker setup already, and I was naming this branch because I wanted to do an update of Docker. So this is called Docker update, and you can find it also here. Docker update, it's there. So we can pick out that branch and see the differences. It's still not merged. There's a pending pull request out of those many Docker, out of those many pull requests. This one here. And maybe let's introduce Docker quickly. So Mariam, you're using Vagrant already. Probably some of you have used VirtualBox or something similar. What is Docker? So Docker is about virtualization. Virtualization is a concept where you kind of imitate an operating system or some kind of working environment within a host environment system, like your operating system. So, and from my experience, I know virtualizations basically that I'm, for example, installing Windows on Linux. So I'm a Linux user, and if I want to, for example, run an application that only runs on Windows, one way of doing it would be to have Windows installed in VirtualBox and run Windows in VirtualBox and run that particular application in Windows. Does that make sense? Are you still with me so far?
Yes.
So the problem with virtualization is that it comes with a performance impact. And this performance impact is quite heavy. So it's not fun to, for example, develop within a virtualized environment. So I honor Mariam's effort to run Linux within Vagrant, because I would probably be so annoyed because it's taking so long in that VirtualBox. Or what's your opinion about it, Mariam?
You mean using Vagrant or running?
For example, using Vagrant.
Yeah, I think it's better because like when I use Windows, I run into a lot of problems. So like to avoid that, I just like use virtualization.
Yeah. Okay, so Docker is a tool that is similar to something like VirtualBox or Vagrant, but doesn't come with the performance impact. And even if it sounds like a minor thing, it's actually a big thing. So Docker makes it possible that you can basically execute an application similar to, like, execute an application on your machine in a similar environment that is as close as possible to the production environment. So our production environment, for example, I'm using a virtual private server, which is running on a German VPS hoster called Überspace. And I can also, for example, SSH into the production server. So,
Robert, could you please increase your font?
Say it again.
Could you please increase your font size?
Yes.
Increase.
Of course. One moment. Config alacrity font size. So is that better, maybe?
Yes.
All right. So my user is called RFMV. I do have an SSH key already on our production server. So I'm currently now on the production server. And there's our backend running. And also there's an Apache running, which is just serving those static files. So if you enter Rundfunk mitbestimmen in your browser, you will get the static files that are the AmberJS application, and then your browser will send a request to API@rundfunkmitbestimmen. So what's the problem here? The problem here is that we are using CentOS on, what is it? Linux. What's the command? Linux, check Linux. To check the operating system on the command line. Uni. Oh. Yeah, something like that, probably. It's not in there. How about that? Okay. So does anybody know on? I think that's the one. Yeah. So we are running a Linux here and some kind of Red Hat operating system. I think CentOS is developed by Red Hat, and we are using some kind of Ruby version on our production. This Ruby version is 2.5, and we also have some kind of Postgres version, the SQL version 9.6, and then we have some kind of Node. No, the Node version is not relevant here because we're not running. So, but the problem is we have a lot of dependencies here, and your working environment might be different. You might be using Mac OS or Windows, and you use a different Ruby version, and so on and so on. And we had troubles with that in the past. So I was, for example, deploying the application, and then we had some database permission errors or whatever, and it was not. That was, and we had some errors in production, which is not very fortunate. Or the other way, our build server is failing because on our build server is called Travis CI. And this build server is, I think, running in some kind of container. So this is yet another working environment in which this application is running. And it might be that we have some errors in our build server, such as now, because our build server is actually failing for some reason. And I haven't checked it. I haven't checked why. So this is very unfortunate. Do you agree?
Yes, I do agree.
Yep, that's one way of putting it.
Yeah. So I hope that with a Dockerized installation, we can kind of get around those problems. So the first thing that Docker is providing is it's giving you a one-click installation of the application. So right now you have to do a lot of things. You preferably are running Linux or Mac OS X. You have Node and Yarn, and you have to install Ember, and then you need to have some kind of Ruby version. So for example, here in the README we are stating 2.4, while on our production it's 2.5. Okay, so there's already a version difference here, and a lot of things. So first of all, it needs to run on your local machine. Second thing, it needs to run on Travis CI. Third thing, it needs to run on our production environment. And all those environments are pretty much different. So the idea is to have one Dockerized installation for all those three, which should be better for onboarding, which should reduce the error rate or false positive rate on our build server, and which also helps to mitigate errors in production. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think the point is to develop, build, and deploy to the exact same environment, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
So that's the path. That's actually the best summary I've heard so far.
Okay.
Thank you very much, Federico.
Yep.
Oh, and there's already some kind of README here, which is explaining how to do the installation with Docker, but you don't have software tests because those software tests were not yet implemented in this installation. But the idea is that you just have like one command, or no, like okay, this is some kind of custom script, but the idea is to have just one command, Docker compose or something, and then all the services, all the relevant services start. Oh, and by the way, there are also other dependencies within this README that I didn't mention. For example, you need Redis, the database Redis. You need Sidekick, and you have to run this service. And all those services can be executed with just one command. So there are two different tools. One of it is called Docker, and the other one is Docker Compose. So Docker is doing all the virtualization. Docker version. Oh, and I should start a new terminal. So I hope you can see everything. Docker versions. Oh, no. Version. So I'm running Docker version 18. And you have a couple of commands in order to see currently running containers. So in the terminology in Docker is that you have containers instead of what's the term in ordinary virtualization? Say it again.
Images?
Yeah. Maybe image refers to the file, not the running thing. But I think you get what I mean, right?
Yeah.
So, and I think the command to list containers is Docker PS, or I think there's a synonym called Docker container list. No? Yes, that's the same thing. So right here, I have two containers running at this very moment. So I was developing some kind of WordPress thingy here, and MySQL. This is the database, and this is all running within a container. So you don't need to have, for example, MySQL installed on your system. and have it configured, you can run it within a container without any performance impact. You just have to run the Docker container, and that's pretty much it. So you have one tool that enables you to run and install any other tool. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And the reason why I was asking Mariam if it's actually running on Windows is that Docker was initially developed for Linux. Then it was developed further to run on Mac. And Windows apparently is also now on the list of operating system that Docker can be installed in. So if you're running Windows, all you need to do is to have Docker installed, and then you could run any application that is Dockerized. So Dockerized means it comes with some installation procedure, which the only thing you actually need is Docker. Okay. And I'm still confusing sometimes Docker with Docker Compose. In Docker, we also have some kind of Docker hub, where you can install images from. So if there's any service you need, for example, we talked about the Redis database already, then there is what? There's no image for Redis? I can't believe it. Docker Redis. There you go. So, for example, there could be an image
from the command line as well, Robert. I don't know if you've done that before.
No, I haven't. Tell me what? How?
Docker search, and then whatever you want to pass in as a search term, I believe. Nice. Or it might be Docker Compose search.
Yeah, no, it's search. So you say Docker Redis, and then you have all your options, and similar to GitHub, you have apparently also stars, so people can vote on repositories.
And the official repository as well.
Yeah, and yeah, true. That's here. And so you could just install, I don't know, Redis. I don't even know how to install it without Docker Compose. Maybe you can help me, Matthew. Do you know how to install Redis with?
Yeah, I have done before, but I can't remember can't remember exactly.
Yeah, I'm only using Docker Compose, so I don't really know how to do it. So okay, there will be a way how to do it.
I think you just do a Docker poll. Docker poll.
Apparently, yes, that makes sense.
And if you don't specify after, like, you can put a colon and specify latest, or you can leave it blank and it'll default to the latest, or you can pass in a specific version. Yeah.
So if you have some kind of version constraint, and that's very often the case, then you can add some kind of version to it. So for example, we have to have Postgres 9.6 for Rundfunk mitbestimmen. Anything below 9.2 is not possible because we depend on a particular extension that was introduced in 9.4, I think. So the Postgres version needs to be set for our application. You cannot just use any kind of Postgres because we're using historical tables for statistical purposes. And this was introduced at a very particular version. And I think the default installed version, for example, on Mac OS, is way older than that. Does it make sense?
Yeah, so it's important to specify sometimes it's important to specify the version number.
Exactly. Mm-hmm. For reasons.
Right.
And so I am currently now on, so what are our services for Rundfunk mitbestimmen? So for Rundfunk mitbestimmen, we first of all have a front end, which needs Node.js, and for example, Yarn as a package manager. We have the backend, which needs Ruby, obviously, because we are running Ruby on Rails. It needs to install the backend dependencies, for example, Rails and all the other gems. And we have a Sidekick for asynchronous jobs, which are also part of the backend. And we have full stack tests. Okay, so if I would, I don't know, draw an image, I would probably say that whatever. Yeah, come on. So we have our backend, we have our front end, and we have the database, or maybe let's say Postgres to be very specific. We have Redis, which is needed by Sidekick. We have end-to-end tests, or let's say full stack tests, or maybe say Capybara, because Capybara is the thing that is used in order to run those full stack tests. We have Ruby as a Ruby as a dependency. We have Node.js as a dependency. Okay, so here's our list of dependencies. And we can, for example, now create some kind of graph.
Robert?
Yeah?
Could you please increase your font? I'm finding it hard. Yeah.
Like this?
Yeah.
So, and this one is called Sidekick. I have to think about, probably there's one in the middle. I should say Rails probably, because yeah, I think that makes more sense. Because we have Rails. Federico, what's your opinion about my dependency diagram?
Yeah, so are you trying to say, oh, okay, I see what you're doing now. So, yeah, I like what you're doing there. So it would help if you put some arrows. So like Capybara is dependent.
Exactly, that was what I wanted to do right now. So I'm now painting the dependencies between all our services. And maybe call that amber. So any questions from your side while I'm painting? Do you have a clue what Docker is about? And what are the suggested advantages of Docker in our particular case? No, that one. For example, Matt or Faith?
Like you said, we have problems at the moment, so advantage of Docker is that it's going to help us solve those problems.
So, and Sidekick needs Redis. And I think this is it. No, actually, it's that way. As far as I know, Sidekick also needs access to the database. Okay. Maybe we can also have the user, which is on the same level as Capybara, because it's, I think the user only needs access to Ember.js. And actually, no, there is no, is there? Yes, there is. There's a dependency. And then there's a dependency of the user, because the user is using a browser, and the browser needs the backend for API requests. Maybe call that just API. How about that? Does that make sense, Federico?
Yeah, I think you did a nice job there.
So
Just didn't get why Node.js.
why Node.js?
Yeah.
Yeah, so Ember.js is a framework which is written, which is a Node.js framework. So you need Node in order to run Ember.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
So Node is the the interpreter for JavaScript.
Yes.
With Node, you can execute JavaScript outside the browser. So as you know, JavaScript originated as a language dedicated for the browser. And I don't know when, but Node.js was developed
2009. I think 2009.
2009? 2009, you're correct.
Do I get a
And
prize?
who did it? Was it Google? I mean, Google was developing the V8 thing.
No, I think he. What's his name? I think his name. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Anyhow, so Node is similar to Ruby in the respect that you can run like JavaScript files with this command. It's the interpreter for JavaScript on your laptop, for example, and with it you can run anything, like any JavaScript files. And Ember.js is also a Node.js framework, as it is, for example, React and Node.js. So for building JavaScript and HTML, you have to have Node.js. Is that actually correct? Yes, I think so.
I think I watched a video that said you could use anything else. Is it okay?
Say it
I just
again?
can't remember.
What was your question, Robert?
I wasn't. I'm not quite sure about the dependencies. I think all those Node.js frameworks have an obvious dependency to Node.js, right? I mean, they have to have a dependency to Node.js.
Yeah, in terms of at least setting up your environment, they do. And yeah, I can't think of a way to actually develop without Node.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, but how is it like? Isn't it difficult to have two frameworks like Node.js and Rails?
Yes, it is. That was Faith's question in the beginning. So Faith was asking why Ember, and why Ember is actually a question about the framework in particular, and why using an SPA framework after all? Why not just using just Rails? With just Rails, you would probably, so you wouldn't have Ember and you wouldn't have Node.js as a dependency, and everything would be on the server. So maybe I should make it a little bit more clear.
Or maybe why not use Node.js, like without Rails?
That's also possible. So you can have only Node.js. You can have, since Node.js is running on outside the browser, you can have your backend also written in Node.js. So in another project, I'm, for example, working on a framework which is called Vue.js, and they use Feathers.js in the backend. And those are both Node.js frameworks. Vue.js for the front end, Feathers.js for the backend. So when you run Rundfunk mitbestimmen, your front end is sending requests to the backend, as you can see here. Hang on. Why it's taking so long? Come on. I don't know why it's taking so long. Okay, but there's one request getting the JavaScript files in HTML from the server, and there's another one which is which is doing a request to the backend, and the backend is running at api.rundfunk-mitbestimmen.de. So there's in a backend which is written in Rails, which is just giving you this JSON here, right? So it's returning this JSON, the data. The backend, the Rails backend, in our case, is just for the data. Is that clear? Like, is everyone on the same page here?
Yeah, but can't Node.js do that as well?
You can implement the backend with Node.js too. That's possible. So it's up to you. You can have Node.js, you can have Python, you can have Ruby on your backend. It's up to you, whatever you feel more comfortable with. So in our case, we are using Rails as an API. Maybe
I just wanted to know if there's a particular reason for this.
Say it again.
Like, do you have a particular reason for using Rails for data? Or?
Yes, I was using Rails when I was a full-time developer. So I'm using Rails for a long, long time, and I have a lot of experience with Rails. And at the time when I was doing the decision, I didn't have so much experience with Node.js. So I decided to implement the front end with Node.js while sticking to Ruby on the backend side.
Oh, yeah.
So there are many different combinations. And I just painted a rectangle for the backend view and the front end. So this is all backend here, and this is all front end. And so here's the distinction. And you as a user, you first get the front end, and if the front end is running in your browser, the browser will execute API requests to the backend. Does that make sense? Maybe I should say browser instead of user. How about that? Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Maybe I can also put a URL here. So this is the URL. And this one here is running on API. Right?
So Robert, I have a question.
Yes.
Like a couple months ago, we talked about, I think, something in Ember that I think it might have been like a dependency or a library that allows for server-side rendering. And I don't recall if you were going to implement that or if you already have. And so I wonder, yeah, Fastbook, that's what it was, right? Or Fastboot, yeah. So I wonder if you could talk about that a little bit.
So I made a dashed line because it's not yet implemented.
Okay.
So to make it even more complex, Fastboot is a thing to do some kind of server-side rendering with Ember. So any browser that is not able to, for example, execute JavaScript, Fastboot is giving you. Oh, come on. I see that we are not talking about Docker anymore, but I think that's okay. So Fastboot would send you plain HTML instead of JavaScript for the time for any browser that is not, for example, capable of executing JavaScript. For example, Google's bot. So if you just check out the source code, you cannot see any HTML here. You just have a pile of JavaScript and that's it, right? This one here.
Yeah.
And so all the HTML here is rendered on the server. Sorry, on the client. I'm sorry. So this HTML here is rendered as soon as all the JavaScript is downloaded. Does that make sense?
Yeah, but that can take a little bit of time sometimes.
Yes, exactly. So when I do a hard refresh, the screen should be blank now. No, okay, it's not. Now it's blank. So this time here, so it's first of all, it's downloading now, which takes a while because of my connection. I'm not having a good connection right now. And now it's rendered in my browser and it's sending the API request. All right?
Yes.
So if we want to install all of these services, you need all of these services in order to run backend tests, front-end tests, and full-stack tests. In order to run full-stack tests and to develop, we basically need to install all of those services. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
All right. And there's another tool that helps you to compose those services in each, like you would have one Docker container for all of those services. And this tool is called Docker Compose, right? So what is Docker Compose? Docker Compose is another tool that's using Docker in order to get you a quick way of installing all the services you need. So for example, you could have a file called Docker Compose YAML, and in that file, you define two services here. So you define some kind of web service, and you find, for example, Redis. Here's the version constraint of Redis, and you say, okay, we are exposing a HTTP port. Okay, so from our host machine, in my case, would be Linux, to whatever, like the Docker container. So we are forwarding port HTTP port 5000 to 5000 within that Docker container. Does that make sense? Are you still with me?
Yeah.
In that particular example, you could then say localhost 5000, and if I hit enter, then this request would go into the Docker container, right? Like this example here. Can you see it?
Increase your font size.
This one here.
Thanks.
So we have two services, Redis and web, and we have our ports here. And there are other commands, like all of those words have some kind of meaning in order to set up your Docker containers. And then there's one command, which is called Docker Compose Up, which then will install all the relevant images if you don't have it on the system. And it's executing all of those services in an order on which they depend. So you might have dependencies, for example, between web and Redis. I don't think we have a dependency here. Like it's not in this Docker Compose YAML file at least. But let's say you would have a dependency, then Docker Compose would first start the container without any dependencies. If that container is up and running, it will execute the other containers. Does that make sense? So back to our example, Docker would first execute Postgres or install and launch Postgres, Ruby, Redis, Node.js, and so on. Actually, why do I have Ruby as a dependency? If I have Ruby as a dependency, I also need, oh no, that's actually Node. Okay, it's okay. And so it's still correct. So it first will launch the database, the other database, and will install Ruby and JavaScript. And as soon as that is done, it will install Rails, install Sidekick, and install Ember.js, and then it would execute the API. And maybe as a very last thing, have another container in which you have your full stack tests, which are using the front end and the back end simultaneously. Okay. Are you still with me?
Yes.
And we have that file already. So there is one Docker Compose file, and it's here, and it's quite complex. So we have what features, what services do we have? First, we have features. Maybe a little bit misleading. So it's named after the folder features, but it's actually what we call here capybara. So these are the front-end tests, the full-stack tests. Then we have the front end. Then we have the back end. Then we have the Sidekick container. Then we have the database, which is Postgres, and we have Redis. And here are the dependencies. So Sidekick is depending on the database and Redis, just as in our diagram here. So Sidekick is depending on Postgres and Redis as a service. Okay. So Ruby is not here because the image is, it's a custom built image. Okay, anyhow. Yeah, Docker file. So here we have the image for our backend, which is running on CentOS. So I try to have the same working environment as on our hosting service. We are running CentOS there, so I'm running CentOS in the Docker container. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, and from that image, all we need to do is to install certain tools. For example, we are apparently installing Postgres as the client. And especially we are installing Ruby here, Ruby 2.5. So we have the right Ruby version. And we are installing the dependencies, what you do when you run bundle install. So all of that goes into the backend. Okay, all of this is the backend, and we are copying files into the into our backend. So everything that is in the folder backend will go into our Docker container, which we call backend. Or Rundfunk mitbestimmen backend. I don't know how it's called here. It's just called backend. All right. Does it make sense?
Yes.
So all I want to explain is that basically have this picture here in mind, and then think of your Docker Compose file as like the manifestation of that image. And yeah, to have one Docker container for each service. And in order to execute each service, I mean, you have to like do some installation instructions. Basically, you try to write a README for Docker, like what we have in our README here. Oh, my internet is so slow today. So what we have here, like clone it and go into the folder, install dependencies, install front-end dependencies, and so on. All of that is done in the Docker file. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So one Docker Compose file, many Docker files. This one here, where my cursor is right now, that's the Docker Compose. And then you have many Docker files, and those Docker files are based on an image. So this one here is based on CentOS version 7. So it's a Linux Docker container, while the front end is has a Docker file which is based on some kind of node in Linux Alpine. Do I pronounce it correctly, Federico? Or Matt? How do you pronounce this word?
Yes, Alpine.
Alpine. So there's Linux Alpine. And, which is a very, very small Linux. security-oriented, lightweight Linux distribution, and it has Node already. So this is what we need for our front end. And what we also do in our Docker Compose, so this is like the top level configuration file, is we are exposing ports. So we have to export port 3000 for our backend, and we have to expose 4200 for our front end. So, okay, long talk, no action. Let's just try it out. So I'm now switching into our repository. I'm now currently on branch Docker update. And all I should do is to say Docker compose up, and then things are going to happen. And I haven't did that for a long, long time. So I'm very interested whether this will actually work. But this is basically when everything is up and when everything is correct, this will be the only command that you, Mariam, have to execute in order to have your installation on Windows. There's no database configuration anymore. You don't need to install Node by hand. You don't need to install Ruby. You don't need to install anything anymore. Just Docker, and then you're good to go. Right? So I don't know what's going on now, but probably it's just checking whether or not there are some images, and it will probably build the Docker files first. I don't know. Docker PS. Oh. So probably it's going to download those images that I don't have right now, because there's no Docker container for example, MySQL. It's taking really long.
Is there
Is
a Docker compose verbose, or is this verbose?
Probably. Oh no. So there's no verbose. There's just ma.
Okay. I was just wondering.
So in a perfect world, you would just have to say Docker compose up, and then then the magic starts. Okay.
Yeah.
And Docker will take care of downloading the relevant images, building those Docker files, starting the Docker containers in the right order, and after some while, but you don't have to. It's not. You don't have to specify anything. You don't have to do anything by hand. In the end, all you have to do is to just point your browser to localhost 4200, and then there it is. So right now it's unable to connect because the Docker containers are not ready, but that is going to happen hopefully. So was this I was talking for a long time and didn't get a lot of feedback. Did I do you know more about Docker than before, or did I confuse you?
Yeah, I definitely do. Yes. Yeah, that was very helpful.
Really? Yeah. Is the setup reasonable in a way? The bunch of services that we have in our particular repository, application.
You mean within Docker, or?
For Rundfunk mitbestimmen is basically I'll show. It is quite hot, 7 degrees Celsius. That's why I'm experiencing low connection and a slow. Hear me? Hello.
For me, you were slowing down there. I think you're,
Breaking as well.
yeah, I think you're coming back to normal though.
Robert, are you there, Robert? Hello.
Can you still hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, you're breaking up.
Yeah.
But
Yeah, we can hear you again. I think if you want to try.
So I'm
to
running Docker in the background. So okay, I'm not to show you what will happen if you do Docker compose up. All right. So now I stop the Docker compose command. Can you hear me better?
Yes.
Yeah.
Right. So I think my machine is currently under heavy load, and that's why the connection is a little bit broken.
Yeah, I think that's what it was, because you're back to normal.
Yeah. So what I wanted to say is, do you have a better overview of all our dependencies and services now? Like, does it make sense to have a Docker file with this like dependency graph and execution order?
yeah, I really like the graph. If I don't know if you can put that on the channel, pin it on the channel, or
Sure.
Robert, you could add some color to make it look nice.
I hope I can share it. Publish link. Links? What?
You can probably just go to print, and then it'll give you the PDF option.
Probably like this. Yeah. So I think this link has everything, and I can also export it. As a
I don't know if the link is really long. I don't know if there's a way to shorten it, or if it matters.
I think the link has the geometry included. Like, it's actually not saving anything on their server. The link has, that's the reason why the link is so long. Yeah, I think they're encoding the diagram in the link. But I can also share the file. Your computer. Here you go. All right.
Yeah, thank you, Robert. That was a good talk. You should go to a conference or something. Have you ever given a conference talk?
Yes.
Yeah, actually, I shared a
So
video. Yeah, when he was a bit younger, at the very beginning of Rundfunk.
Yeah, I'm sometimes not feeling very well when I just I talk and talk and talk, and sometimes I think, do I actually explain it adequately? Are they still with me? Is there anything not very clear or not very understandable? So, yeah.
Yeah, no, it can be tough sometimes when you're just talking and talking, and you just keep talking because you're not getting any response.
Yeah.
But you do a nice job, so don't worry about it.
Okay, fair enough.
Yeah, sounds clear.
Robert, I had a question. Going back to what you were talking about before, I've seen recently that there's like in, I guess, XUnit, you can test by like assert with delta, and then you can pass in like a difference in the precision between what you're testing for and what you're expecting. Is that something that we might be able to? Is there something like that with the testing suite that we're using in Rundfunk?
Yes, there is. So now we are on a different topic. So no Docker anymore. Matt is currently asking because of the issue that we had last week. Remember, we have 2 dates. Probably those are a little bit different because of a race condition. And Matt is currently asking how can we do some kind of fuzzy comparison. And the trick here is just to those dates, JavaScript dates, are just integers. I think it's called Unix time, the number of milliseconds from the 1st of January from 1970. Is that correct? I think I had the question last week again, and I think we answered.
Yeah,
that's either that's either correct or it's real close.
Yeah, Thursday, 1st of January 1970. Number of seconds, not number of milliseconds. So number of seconds, but anyhow. Okay, and you can basically subtract those 2 dates, and you will get another number, and then you can assert that this number is not too large. That would mean those 2 dates are not too far off. You could, for example, assert that it is smaller than 60 times 60. That would be 1 hour. Because 60 seconds is 1 minute. 60 minutes is 1 hour. Right?
Yeah.
That would be one way to do it. But I think Moment.js can give you also a nice way of comparing dates.
Just talking about Docker, like I thought the way you explained it was really, really good. And like I have some experience on Dockerizing an application, which I actually went all the way up until the moment of truth and the Docker compose up. And then I kind of took a step back and I ended up talking to Sam in a scrum, and he was saying that probably for what I'm trying to accomplish, it wasn't the right solution. Or maybe it was a little overkill, so I kind of didn't finish that. But so some of it was definitely familiar. But I think like for me, it's always nice to actually practice doing something, because then you can run into all kinds of snags or issues that you weren't expecting.
Yeah.
So I don't know if if that helps. I don't know if there's a way we can practice Dockerizing RFM when it's already Dockerized, but just as a general.
Yes, of course. So you can, for example, we can pair on Dockerizing RFM. So I did accomplish that you were able to execute the application. I also did accomplish that you can run tests like backend and frontend tests. What I didn't accomplish yet is to run frontend tests. So running frontend tests from a Docker container. This Docker container obviously needs the front end and the back end, right? So the front end test, the full stack test is running Capybara, which is like a browser, and it's executing like it needs to get the Ember.js front end from the front end container, and it's sending requests to the data to the API container, the backend container. Does that make sense?
Yep.
And I didn't accomplish that, so we can pair on that one, for example.
Yeah, I'm keen. I don't know if you want to talk on Slack or if you know a day that's good for you, but.
Yes, now. Of course. We can, for example, talk on Slack. We can pair together. So how about that? So it's already 9:15. We're going to close this the regular meeting for now. I can, for example, Faith and Mariam, if you want to work on a smaller issue, so Docker container is quite a large issue, a very complex thing. You can, for example, work together on the branch that Faith is currently working on, the fixing the right configuration in the database configuration, right, Faith? Is that true?
Yes.
So for you two, you can, for example, work together on that one. It's also great because Mariam is currently running Windows, and you are running, I think, Faith, you are on macOS. Is that true?
Yes.
So comparing the different setups on different machines. Why not?
Yeah.
And Matt, you were interested in Dockerizing things. We can do that one, like accomplishing how to execute front-end tests with the Docker container, which would be nice because then we could also use the Docker container on Travis, right? Travis is a little bit flaky. It has a lot of false positives sometimes. Having the Docker container would make it a little bit easier to debug those false positives on the build server. And at some point, we can use Docker even in production to make it even more smooth, like have Docker on all those environments, not only on your laptop, but on your build server and in production and everything. And yeah, so who's me? I think Federico. Is there anything you have in mind?
No, I just like to get more practice with Docker. I did get this book for Docker for Rails developers. It's in beta. And
so you gave a talk before about Docker and Rails?
No. It's a book. And I'm gonna start reading it. I just bought it the other day. So so I'd be interested in pairing with you guys when you guys pair about the Docker.
Yeah, perfect. There you go.
Cool.
Any questions from anybody so far?
No.
No? All right, so let's close this regular meeting, I would say. No? It has been some time. Almost more than 1 hour, as far as I know. Is that a good idea?
Yep.
All right, so then thank you very much. I will hit the stop broadcast button now. And this is it.